The train whistle echoed through the dry Wyoming air, long and lonely, like a cry that didn't know where to go. Dust lifted from the old wooden platform as the iron beast rolled in, the sunlight bouncing off its black sides. Beside a single weathered bench stood Eleanor Grace, a woman whose face carried the traces of time, not from age alone, but from years of waiting. Her hands, gloved in faded lace, trembled slightly as she clutched the worn letter that had brought her here. She had answered an ad from a rancher seeking a wife. After years of caring for her ailing parents, Eleanor had watched her youth drift away like tumbleweed across the plains. She was 42 now, too old, they said, for a new beginning. But the rancher's words in the letter had been gentle, kind and real. I don't need a beauty. I need someone who understands silence and sunrise. That line alone had made her heart believe again. The doors of the train opened, and men in hats and dust-covered boots shuffled off. She looked around, her heart pounding. Then she saw him, Thomas Hale, standing near the hitching post, tall, broad-shouldered, with grey at his temples and a quiet sadness in his eyes. He tipped his hat when their eyes met. She smiled nervously, clutching her bag. "Mrs. Grace?" he asked softly. "Miss," she corrected with a shy laugh, "though I suppose the plan was to change that." He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile and helped her down from the platform. "You must be tired. The ranch isn't far." The ride back was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. The land stretched endlessly, golden, wild, beautiful. She could hear the creak of the wagon, the horses' slow steps, and the wind whispering through the grass. Thomas didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice carried warmth. They reached his ranch, a lonely house sitting against the endless horizon. She could tell it had been built with his own hands, sturdy, simple, full of heart. A young woman came out to greet them, the local postmaster's niece, Clara, who helped run small-town errands. She looked at Eleanor, hesitated, and then whispered something to Thomas. Eleanor didn't hear, but she saw his jaw tighten. Later, as she unpacked in the small guest room, she overheard voices outside. Clara's voice, sharp and pitying. "Thomas, she's older than you said. Folks will talk. She's not what you ordered." Eleanor froze. The words hit her harder than she expected. Too old. That phrase again, it followed her everywhere. Her hands shook as she set her suitcase down. She had been brave enough to cross a country, to take a chance on love, and now she felt foolish. That night, Thomas knocked on her door. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I need to talk." Her heart sank. She already knew what he'd say. She turned to face him, forcing a smile. "You don't have to say it. The agency already telegraphed me. They said you're sending me back on the morning train." He looked startled. "They did?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "It's all right. I understand. I should have known. No one wants the woman who waited too long." Thomas stepped closer, his boots silent on the wooden floor. "Eleanor," he said, voice low and rough with emotion, "that's not what I said. The agency sent that message without asking me." She blinked. "Then why?" he interrupted, his hand trembling as he reached for the edge of her shawl. "They think I ordered a girl to look good on my porch. I asked for someone to stay, someone who wouldn't leave when the rain came or the cattle died or the silence got too loud. I didn't want a young girl with soft hands. I wanted you." Eleanor felt tears well up. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Thomas continued, stepping closer, the moonlight catching his weathered face. "I told them to send you back," he said, "because they thought you weren't what I needed. But Eleanor," his voice softened, almost breaking, "then I realized I don't care what they think. If the world calls you too old, too late, too anything, then let them. You're exactly what I prayed for." For a long moment neither moved. The wind outside howled softly through the dry grass. Eleanor looked at him, her heart trembling like it hadn't in years. "Thomas," she whispered, "why would you want someone like me?" He smiled gently, stepping even closer until his rough hand rested on hers. "Because," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've spent my whole life wanting someone who understands what it means to lose time." and still be willing to start again. Eleanor's tears fell silently. She lowered her gaze, her heart fighting between fear and hope. "I don't know how to start again," she whispered. Thomas smiled, that rare, tired smile that carried a lifetime of loneliness. "Then just be mine," he said simply. "We'll figure out the rest together." Outside, the night wind died down, and for the first time in years, the old house didn't feel so empty. The morning light spilled over the open plains like liquid gold, bathing the Hale ranch in warmth and promise. Eleanor stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. She watched Thomas outside, already tending to the horses, his broad back catching the sunlight. It had been 2 weeks since that night, the night everything changed, and yet it still felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. No one in town had expected her to stay. The whispers followed her whenever she went into Mill Creek to buy flour or soap. "That's the one he kept," they'd murmur. "The one too old for the mail order program." Some laughed quietly, others just looked away. But Eleanor had learned something long ago. People's words didn't build homes, and they sure didn't plow fields. Inside the house, she moved with purpose. The curtains were cleaned, the floors scrubbed, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. For the first time in years, the place felt alive, not just like a house, but like a home. Thomas stepped in, wiping sweat from his brow. "You didn't have to do all this," he said softly, glancing at the table she'd set with warm biscuits and bacon. Eleanor smiled. "It's not work when it's for someone who deserves it." He paused, meeting her gaze. His eyes filled with something quiet but deep, a gratitude that went beyond words. He sat down, awkwardly at first, like a man who wasn't used to being cared for. "You make this place feel different," he said after a long silence. "How so?" she asked, curious. "Warmer," he said simply, "like I ain't just living here anymore. I'm home." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the world outside faded. The gossip, the judgment, the years they thought had been wasted. Here in this small kitchen, something new was growing. Later that day, Thomas took her out to the edge of his property. The sun was high, the wind sharp with the scent of dust and wild sage. "This ranch wasn't always mine," he said, leaning on the fence post. "I bought it after my wife passed. Thought I could outrun the silence. Turns out you can't." Eleanor listened quietly. The pain in his voice wasn't loud, but it was real. He turned to her. "You don't owe me anything, Eleanor. You can still leave if this life feels too rough." She looked at him, steady and strong. "Thomas, I crossed half the country because I was tired of leaving. I'm staying because I want to, not because I have nowhere else to go." He stared at her for a moment, then smiled. That small, honest smile she was beginning to love. "You sound more stubborn than me." She laughed softly. "Maybe that's why we'll get along." That evening, a storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned grey and thunder cracked across the plains. Thomas ran outside to bring in the horses while Eleanor secured the windows. The wind howled, rattling the house, but she stayed calm. Years of hardship had taught her that storms always pass. When he came back, soaked and shivering, she met him at the door with a towel and a smile. "You look like a man who wrestled the clouds and lost," she teased. He laughed breathlessly. "Maybe I did." She helped him dry off, her hands gentle but sure. The firelight flickered against their faces. For a long time, neither spoke. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something rare, something real. He looked at her then, really looked, at the lines by her eyes, the silver strands in her hair, the strength that age had given her. "You're beautiful," he said quietly, almost to himself. Eleanor froze. No one had said those words to her in 20 years. "You don't have to say that," she whispered. "I ain't saying it because I have to," he replied. "I'm saying it because it's true." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from a joy she'd thought she'd never feel again, the joy of being seen. Outside, the storm began to fade. The rain softened to a drizzle, and the smell of wet earth drifted through the open window. Thomas reached for her hand. "You know," he said softly, I think God sent that letter to the wrong man. She laughed through her tears. And yet somehow it ended up exactly where it needed to. He smiled. Guess some mistakes are meant to be. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor learned to ride, to mend fences, to handle the cattle drives alongside him. The town still whispered, but less now, because what they saw at the Hale Ranch wasn't pity or desperation. It was love, quiet, steady, and strong. The kind that doesn't fade with time, but deepens because of it. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Thomas led her out to the porch. The sky was a canvas of orange and gold. "Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I never was much for fancy words, but I can't imagine a single day here without you." She looked at him, heart pounding. "What are you saying?" He got down on one knee, his hat in his hand, his eyes shining in the fading light. "I'm saying, be mine. For real this time." Her tears fell freely now, soft and full of love. "I already am," she whispered. He rose and kissed her, forehead gently as the wind carried the scent of sage and rain across the plains. The house behind them glowed with firelight, and for the first time both of them knew they weren't running from loneliness anymore. They had found home in each other. The end. If this story touched your heart, remember, love doesn't fade with time. It only deepens with courage. Subscribe now to Old West Legends for more heartwarming tales of love, redemption, and the untold stories of the Wild West.